Well, last week we began a new sermon series entitled Holy Living in an Anxious World. Holy Living in an Anxious World. If you missed last week, the first sermon was about letting go of your own control, letting go of your anxieties, and just putting your faith in God. And if you missed that sermon, it's on Facebook. It's on our Facebook page. You can go check that out if you want to keep up with the sermon series. This week we're going deeper. We're going much deeper. And we're going to begin, and I'm going to begin by reading for you Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. And we don't have it on the screen with us today, so if you've got your Bibles with you, you're welcome to turn to it. And oddly enough, this is one of the 10 commandments. It's the only of the 10 commandments that uses the word holy. And it references the Sabbath. Keep the Sabbath holy. Of all the 10 commandments, it's the only one that uses the word holy. And so let us hear now these words of the Lord together. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your town. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. And finally, I'm going to read for you John chapter 15, verses 1 through 8. Hear these words. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit. Because apart from me, you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers, like branches are gathered, thrown into a fire and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it shall be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. This is the word of God for all the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Let us pray. Lord, I ask you now to bless the message that you have prepared for us. Lord, open up our hearts and our minds to receive it. Lord, speak to us your holy word through these scriptures. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, today, I want to talk to you about what it means to regain God's holy rhythm. To get back the rhythm that God has given for us to live into. To regain God's holy rhythm. Lane, show that first slide here. In reclaiming God's holy rhythm, I believe that this has to happen in two different ways. And first, we have to acknowledge the fact that God gives us a weekly rhythm. He set the example for us in Exodus. It says even God did this so that you yourselves might follow his example. If God needed to take a break, so do we. I remember in 6th grade, I took band. I played the trumpet. Now, I really enjoyed playing band. I enjoyed the trumpet. I used my sister's old horn. It was 20 years old when she had it, so it was really old and rusty by the time it came around to me. And I practiced quite a bit, not as much as I probably should have. God bless my parents. They set through a lot of practice sessions in my house. Now, I don't know if they did this back when you were in school. I don't even know if they do it now. But when I was in 6th grade band, they would rank you. And terms of your ability to play whatever song you were playing that week. And you were either first chair or second or third or last chair. My class had 10 trumpet players. Every week we were tested on that song, whatever we were doing. And every week, I held down the last chair. Like I'm pretty certain they probably engraved my name on that chair because I held it down for so long. And it was just a foregone conclusion that Russ was going to be last chair. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed playing the trumpet, but I just wasn't good at it. I didn't have the ability. And one of the things that I struggled with was rhythm and taking pauses. You see, in 6th grade, I'm looking at these notes and I'm learning how to play them, and I would get so excited. Every time I learned a new note I could play, I would say, "Ooh, look, I know that one. Let me play that one right now." And so when I saw notes, I just played them. Doot, 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 doot. Not even caring for the rhythm or for the pauses, until I was always ahead of everybody. Mr. Barnhart, my teacher, he'd be directing everyone and he'd tell me to slow down. Directing, slow down. And that was how it went about every week. Until I held on the last chair. But the rhythm was something that we all struggled with in our class. He was always saying, "Look, you have to have the pauses here. The pauses help you to appreciate the other notes. You have to find the right rhythm in order to make the best music." That's not just a musical concept. That is a theological concept. That is the idea that God was laying out for us in these scriptures. And I believe that we, as a society, and even we as Christians, we've kind of lost our grip on what it means to live out that holy rhythm, that weekly holy rhythm. Matthew Sleeth, who wrote a great little book entitled 24/6, that's a book that talks about keeping the Sabbath. And in it, he highlights some of the research that has been done about what was the most happiest, most satisfactory, or the era of our American history that gave us the most satisfaction. And most research says that the late 1950s was the happiest and most satisfied Americans have ever been in that late 1950s time period. Now, there have been many factors listed for this, one of which is the post-war prosperity that happened in the 1950s. But a factor that Matthew Sleeth lifted up here was that in the 1950s, we did a pretty good job as a society of honoring the Sabbath. Maybe if you were alive at that point in time, maybe you remember how stores were closed. Most businesses were closed. Even when I was a kid growing up, there were a lot of stores closed on the Sabbath. But ever since that time, slowly but surely, the Sabbath has become more and more and more and more of a work day. When you leave this church, most businesses are going to be open today. And it wasn't just the fact that everything was closed, it was a mindset that we maintained as a society that today was a break. Today was a pause to make the notes that we play throughout the rest of the week better. In the 1990s, Dr. Richard Wiseman was trying to gauge the frantic pace at which our society was moving. And he had a theory, and his theory was that the faster, the more frantic you move about, the more your health becomes risked. You have a better chance of getting heart disease. And so what he did is he tested this by measuring how quickly and how frantically people moved in cities, in major cities. And he said the cities where the people moved at a more frantic pace had a greater chance of having heart disease later. And a 20-year follow-up study said not only has the pace increased, but our levels of heart disease have increased too. And so without this pause, we become more and more frantic, and it's a slippery slope. We start working harder and harder, and it keeps impacting not just our spiritual life, but also our physical life. And now, we live in what's called the information age, where we're just bombarded with all kinds of information, so much so that we can barely digest it all. It said that the average American visits about 99 websites per week. 99 websites per week. In contrast, about 30 years ago, where the bulk of the information you received came from the newspaper that was left in your driveway, and you go outside in your bathrobe, you pick that paper up, and you would read that while you're eating breakfast, and that was the majority of the information you consumed that day. Today, on our smartphones, we have about 1,000 newspapers at our fingertips. So 99 websites visited per American per week. And some of our youth are probably like, that's it? That's all? But we only spend about 56 seconds on each one of those websites. And so we're encountering lots of information, but we're not really consuming it. And that doesn't even include all of social media. It doesn't include Facebook and Twitter and Snap, Tinder, or whatever. Snapchat and Tinder and whatever. I don't know. I'm like old now at this age. I was young, I was really hip 10 years ago when Facebook was out. Now all of a sudden, I got really old really quick. But we have so much information that the river of information that comes through our lives is a mile wide and a quarter-inch deep. We can't possibly consume it all. And when 90% of Americans have their smartphones on them all the time, meaning there's no break from the text messages, there's no break from the websites, from the information, from social media. We don't have any pause in our life to digest it all. When do we get to digest all of the information we're consuming? When do we get to digest everything that's happening in our lives and in our world? We don't. Last week I told you about a time in my life where I had to learn to really, truly let go of all my anxiety and just recognize that Christ is King and let Him be in control. Around that same time, this is earlier part of my ministry, I was not keeping the Sabbath. I really liked the other Ten Commandments. They made great sense, but the Sabbath one kind of offended my sensibilities. That was against what we believe as a society. You have to work and work hard every day. I worked nonstop. I worked 16-hour days with no breaks. And the irony is that the more that I worked, the level of my work continued to decrease. And my work wasn't even good. My sermons suffered. My Bible studies suffered. My communication suffered. I worked and worked, and it all began to suffer. And there was no part of my life that wasn't suffering. I was becoming more and more unhealthy. I wasn't exercising. I was gaining tons of weight. All of this in a year from not keeping the Sabbath. And I wasn't happy. And finally, I had some close friends, Ray Warren, who used to pastor here. These people came to me and said, look, you're a shell of yourself. You're not who you were a year ago. And I had become a martyr for Christ, but then I had to step back and realize that Christ didn't call me to work myself into the ground. Christ called me to be holy. And I wasn't being holy by not honoring the Sabbath. And it was impacting my ministry. I had to remember that quote from Christ in the Gospel of Luke where he said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And I thought back and I realized that maybe the Sabbath is not something that I have to do, but maybe the Sabbath is something that I get to do. It is a gift from God. Today I honor my Sabbath every single Monday. I unplug. I get off social media. I get off the Snap, Tinder, and all that stuff, and I focus on God. I read Scripture more. I pray more, and I take time with the Lord. I take time with my family. And it has revolutionized my life. Now, there is one community in our country that has completely rejected this 24/7 world that we live in. It's a community out in California called Loma Linda. And it's a group of Seventh-day Adventists, which, of course, honor the Sabbath. And their whole culture is structured around God's holy rhythm, around this holy pause. And they have this entire mindset. In fact, the business owners in that town, they all close up shop on Sunday. And here's the most incredible part about this. On average, they live about 12 years longer than the average American. These people who commit to the Sabbath. And if you were to take the number of Sabbaths per year that they have, multiply that by their average lifespan, and divide that figure by 365, you'll end up with 12 years. Which means, and this is what this all means, it means that every Sabbath they observe, quite literally, adds a day to their life. Every Sabbath they observe adds a day to their life. This was the holy rhythm God created us to be a part of. This means that the Sabbath gives life to us spiritually, but also, quite literally, physically. This is the holy rhythm we were meant to be a part of. But it's not just a weekly rhythm. It's also a big picture life rhythm. Go to the next slide, Lane. Our life rhythm. This is a much more difficult concept. It's not nearly as black and white. Let me begin by asking you, how many of you have ever planted cherry tomato plants? Anybody? It's a lot of you. Wow, I was not expecting so many hands. You're going to be great for our community garden. That was a test. We're all going to be planting things in our community garden. Cherry tomatoes are fairly easy to grow. You put them in the ground, and they say you put a cage around it, and they grow up, and then very quickly and very soon they will produce some tomatoes, and quite a few of them. I planted some one year. I had about 6 plants, and I put them in a flower bed, and I stuck them in there, and had the cage there. Well, the wind blew the cage down. Well, I didn't care enough to put it back up. I said, whatever. I tried. And I just left it alone, and sure enough, those 6 plants that were already fallen over began to produce and produce and produce. Lindsay had more cherry tomatoes for her salad than she knew what to do with. We had so much fruit, and I barely had to work for it. Our society wants more and more fruit in quicker and quicker and quicker ways. The generation after every generation wants to accomplish more quicker. Every generation wants to accomplish more quicker. We want more fruit, and we want it more quickly. But when God talked about life rhythm, He didn't use the example of a cherry tomato that produces fruit almost instantly. What did He use the example of? A vineyard. And vineyards don't grow fruit quite as easily, do they? You can't just put it in the ground and all of a sudden you got tons of fruit. It doesn't work that way. In fact, when you begin growing, you got to be really careful because it can become a real mangled mess. It can attach itself to things that you don't want. And it can grow into virtually nothing too. And so whoever the gardener is for this vineyard has to pay careful attention to it every day. And here's the thing, when you're beginning a new vineyard, you do a ton of pruning. And you do it with the expectation that you're not going to have any fruit for a really long time. And God says, that's what you're like. You're like a branch. I'm the vine, Christ says, and God's the gardener. And you're not going to get fruit for a while. I've got to work with you. I've got to trim away the dead stuff. I've got to prune back some of the live stuff. And here's the thing. Here's the thing that we as Christians really struggle with being a branch in God's vineyard. We don't like to get pruned. In fact, even the dead stuff that doesn't grow any fruit, even the dead stuff that's useless in our life, even when God prunes that back, we say, why'd you do that? There was some fruit that could have come from that. And God even asks us, this is what He does, and this is what really infuriates us. When you know that you're on the path that God has called you to do something that's going to be something good for the world, that's going to produce fruit, and then as you're on this path, God cuts you back. God slams the door, He closes the window, He says no to you, and you say, God, why did you do that? I was on the path. I was going to produce fruit. Why'd you prune me back? I remember going, this past week we had annual conference, and We had several new people become ordained in our conference. And I thought back to my own ordination, and I thought back to the struggle that I had, and it was a 10-year process trying to be ordained. And my group of friends, several of them got ordained before me. I went to the board a few times, and a couple of times they said, no, this is okay work, but we think you can do even better. Meanwhile, my friends, my close friends, were being ordained ahead of me, and I was proud of them, I was happy for them, but I was frustrated with God. I said, God, I should be with them. I should be walking across that stage. The bishop should be laying her hands on me right now. Why am I having to wait? And God said, I'm pruning you back now because I think by holding you back, you can produce even greater fruit. And it was infuriating, but I'm so glad that God did that pruning. Folks, every branch that grows in God's vineyard gets pruned. Every single branch. Regardless of how much fruit they have, they're going to get pruned. God's going to tell you no. God's going to shut some doors, and it's going to infuriate you, and you're going to wonder why. But you have to trust in the gardener. You have to trust that God, when He prunes back in your best interest. I heard an incredible story this week. A story that made my eyes water and nearly brought me into a big sobby mess. A person came to me and they were telling me about a really dark time in their life. A great big struggle. Some of it was from their own doing, some of it wasn't. But they were in this terrible situation. It was really hard. And they took about 20, 30 minutes describing in detail how difficult this was. And before I finish that story, let me tell you this. At my house, my grass and the shrubs around it, the beginning of the season, they just weren't turning green. They weren't really growing, and it was kind of getting embarrassing. My neighbors were pointing and laughing at me. And so Lindsay and I said, we got to get an expert to come in, someone who can fertilize and treat our yard a little bit to make our grass green and make it look good. And so we had this expert come in, this person who had 30 years of experience in doing this. He said he had a local TV show years ago. I said, okay, you're good. You know more than me. And so he came in, and we were walking around my yard this week, and he was giving me a tutorial on every little aspect and ways I could help my yard grow a little bit better. And then we went to the backyard. A few weeks ago, my wife and her mom planted this dogwood tree, about 6 feet high, and 2 weeks later, the thing started to die from the top down. And Lindsay and I were debating. We said, should we prune it back? Should we cut it off? And I didn't, having not known anything about trees ever, I said, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll just ask an expert. So I said, hey, what do you think about this dogwood here? He said, oh, that's dead. That's real dead. I said, oh. Okay. But at the bottom of this tree, and it was 80% of it was dead. At the bottom of the tree, I thought they were weeds. They were kind of branching out from the tree. And I thought, well, it's probably not worth saving. But I don't want to be the one to do it. I'll let my wife and my mother-in-law do that. And then the expert said to me, he said, hey, I can take care of this for you right now. I can fix this tree. I can help it grow. I said, okay, that'd be great. And then he pulls out these pruners from his back pocket. Just cuts down like 80% of the tree. And I thought, oh, no. That was my mother-in-law's tree. Did not see that coming. That escalated quickly. And so next thing I know, like most of the tree is laying on the ground, completely cut off. And he said, no, don't freak out. It's okay. It's okay. He said, there's still some life in this tree. And he saw this little branch kind of sticking out there. He said, this top little branch here, it doesn't look like much, but we're going to put a stake in the ground. We're going to put this thing up. And this is going to be the new leader. This is going to be the thing that grows. This is going to be your new tree. And I said, are you sure about that? It looks like a little weed. He said, no, I promise you, there is the potential in this thing to really, actually grow. And show that picture with me. I'll show you what I'm talking about here. I took a shoelace, that's a stake in the ground. I took a shoelace and I tied that branch and it's pointed upwards. and we'll see what happens. I thought about God the gardener and how when he prunes us back, it may be that he has to make some pretty deep cuts, some pretty big cuts. But he sees this little branch and he says, that's going to be the big producer one day. That's going to be the thing that grows the fruits. So back to my story. This person that was telling me about how terrible this situation was that they were going through, they said, I saw a vision of what my life could be. And it didn't make sense in that moment, but I believed in it. All it was a vision. And here's what God did. God took a stake and put it right next to this person and pointed that vision up. And that stake came in the form of another human being who loved them, who encouraged them, who believed in them. And as they were connected to the vine, tied to the stake, this person slowly got out of the mess they were in and they began to grow. And now this person said, my life is awesome. It's everything God envisioned that I couldn't see at first. But slowly but surely, God took the little live branch that was there in my life and he began to grow it. And he had to work for it. But God said he did an incredible thing in his life. Every single branch gets pruned. All of you in this room are going to get pruned. But we have to remember that God's cuts are not arbitrary. God is not a gardener just waltzing through the garden, just cutting whatever he sees for the fun of it. This is someone who cuts with great intentionality. This is someone who cuts with your best interest in mind. God's cuts are not meant to be arbitrary. They're meant to be redemptive. In order to live into God's holy rhythm, we must put our trust in the great gardener who has produced fruit for people for thousands of years. He has done this, and he can, he has, and he will continue to produce great fruit in you. But you have to submit to the will of the gardener. Let us pray. Lord, we thank you that we live inside of your vineyard. Lord, we thank you that you have an eternity of experience, that we can put our faith and hope in you when things go wrong, when you tell us no and you cut us back. Help us to trust that you have our best interest in mind. And by doing so, Lord, help us all in this room to produce incredible fruit. For Lord, you said that this is what glorifies God. And so help all of our branches to glorify you, O Lord. In your holy name we pray. Amen.